Hi, and welcome to the Neuroethics Learning Collaborative. I'm Martha Farah. I'm a cognitive neuroscientist here at Penn. I direct the Center for Neuroscience and Society here, and I've also put together the lectures in the Neuroethics Learning Collaborative, some of which I give, like this one. So today we're going to be talking about brain-computer interfaces, and I'm going to begin by telling you a little bit about the science and technology of BCI, and then we'll move into the neuroethics, what I'm calling here the societal challenges. So what is a brain-computer interface? Well, it's pretty much what it sounds like. It is a system for either reading out information from the brain to be translated by a computer into motor commands or other forms of communication interacting with the outside world. Or, rather than sending the information out from the brain, it's an interface that brings information in. So it's a system for bringing information into the brain in a way that enables the equivalent of sensation or perception. But what's key is, rather than the usual ways that we either reach out and act upon the world or receive information from the world, with BCI, you have a machine, a computer, interfacing directly with the brain. So you're not using your peripheral nervous system. You're not launching the actions with your own muscles or getting the information in through your own retina or cochlea or whatever. So the ways in which that interface is implemented can vary greatly. The kind of lowest tech, easiest way to rig up a brain-computer interface is using scalp-recorded EEG brainwaves. And here you can see a couple of systems that do that. One very simple system that actually can connect to your iPhone, and believe it or not, there are apps that will either record your EEG to help you to learn to meditate and relax, as sort of a biofeedback mechanism. There are also some electronic games that use EEG picked up from outside the head to, move players and so forth in a game. This is a headset created by a company called Neuroscience that is used for a kind of brain-machine interface that any of you could order online. I don't know how much it costs, but it's readily available. What you see below that is a system with many more electrodes that is able to direct a wheelchair based on brainwaves, based on EEG. And this is obviously, a less frivolous use of scalp-recorded EEG for brain-machine interface. And the idea is that someone who is paralyzed could direct a wheelchair like this experimental system demonstrates, using brain activity alone. Now the problem with these kinds of systems that severely limits their usefulness is, as we know from our neuroscience courses, EEG is a very sort of very limited and kind of coarse-grained measure of brain activity, and really only picks up a subset of brain activity. It has very poor localizing ability because of all the distance of the electrode from the generators of the activity and all the volume conduction that signal undergoes going from the neurons to the electrode. And also, EEG is only tapping into the activity of large numbers of synchronized neurons that also happen to be orientated in the right direction and so forth. So So it's very limited. You can get a more localized, kind of better differentiated system from electrocorticography, abbreviated ECOG, where they place the electrodes right on the surface of the brain, which obviously requires opening up the head, so it's more invasive. But the closer location enables much more differentiated signals, so you can learn more about sort of localized patterns of brain activity, certainly more localized relative to what you get outside of the head like this. And this kind of process is already done routinely for some cases of surgery for epilepsy. Before they go in and do the surgery, they want to map very precisely the seizures and the brain activity associated with important cognitive functions that they don't want to disrupt. So this is something that is, while invasive, it is already done routinely for other reasons. Finally, if you want to really get in there and get the most fine-grained, local and well-differentiated signals from neurons in the cortex, you need to put the electrodes in the cortex, and that is what has been done in various kinds of preclinical research with BCI. So what you see up here is a monkey who has electrodes in his motor cortex, and he's using them to direct a robotic arm. And we'll talk more about that monkey, and you'll see a video of him momentarily. And finally, there have been a small number of humans who've been implanted with intracortical recording electrodes to operate robotic arms and computer cursors and so forth, just by thought alone. So, continuing with just the basic question of, what is a brain-computer interface? What do you do with them? Well, there are two main applications. The first class of applications is to bring information in about the world, and that has been done with cochlear implants, which substitute for the sort of normal mechanism by which sound is transduced into neural impulses, and artificial retinas, which are still experimental, but do a similar thing with vision. They're also used in enabling movement and communication for patients who can't move because of paralysis, spinal cord injury, or because of locked-in syndrome. And what we'll see in the next few slides is just examples of recent work using BCI in these kinds of applications that focus on work with the implanted electrodes. Focusing on the implanted electrodes partly because it's where you can do the most, you can get the best signals in and out, so ultimately you can solve more problems and achieve better outcomes for the patients, and also because obviously that's a bigger deal ethically, and so the neuroethical issues really come up when you're talking about this very invasive procedure of sticking hardware in somebody's head. The first type of BCI that I want to mention to you is cochlear implants. These are actually in use now. In fact, as of spring of 2009, there were 188,000 people in the world with cochlear implants. A cochlear implant consists of a microphone and a signal processor. That's essentially the machine, the computer. that interfaces via implanted electrodes with the auditory nerve. So this is a way to essentially restore hearing, not to normal levels, but good enough that you can understand speech, even listen to music. This person here is Michael Korist. He wrote a wonderful book about his own experience as the recipient of bilateral cochlear implants called Rebuilt: How Becoming Part Computer Made Me More Human. And his hearing is good enough that the very first time I ever interacted with him, it was via a phone call. And I really had no idea what to expect, if he was going to be able to understand me or not. And I never would have known that I was talking to somebody with a hearing problem. So cochlear implants have been wonderfully successful. In fact, successful enough that some within the deaf community fear that it is going to spell, the end of deaf culture, that there will be no more people who are deaf and therefore kind of invested in ASL and all of the art and literature and culture that goes with it. There are also BCIs for vision. Several different companies are developing artificial retinas. Some of them, most of them connect to the optic nerve in the eye, but some actually directly stimulate visual cortex. And although these are still experimental, they have certainly enabled people to have some degree of form vision, to actually see which way the big E on the vision chart is pointing, and so forth. For movement, the research is, mostly what's called preclinical. That is, work with animals to try to understand the general approach that might work and be useful. But the research has been advancing quickly in the last 10 years. I can tell you some of the achievements. They've been quite impressive. So one of the really exciting developments that I think made the daily newspapers, not just science journals, was work out of Miguel Nicolailis's lab at Duke, where he had a setup like this, where he taught a monkey to move a cursor around on a screen using a joystick, meanwhile recording from electrodes implanted in the monkey's motor cortex. And unbeknownst to the monkey, his actions were also being, the brain activity corresponding to his actions were also being relayed to a robotic arm out of sight of the monkey. And after a while, the researchers disconnected the joystick from the computer, okay, so that basically what was making the cursor move around was the monkey's brain activity. Very interestingly, at least the 2 monkeys that they tested this on, after a while figured out that they did not need to be using the joystick and just stopped touching it altogether and sat there just spontaneously moving the cursor using their brain waves alone. And of course, in addition to moving the cursor, they were also manipulating the robotic arm in a remote location. There's another study that I'm going to show you a video of, where Andrew Schwartz and his colleagues at Pittsburgh implanted a monkey in a very similar way, motor cortex. This time, they let the monkey see the robotic arm and get experience using it, driving it with their brain waves. and found that the monkey began to treat the arm very much as if it was, one of his own appendages, and could use it to feed itself treats. So let me go to this video. You'll see the monkey feeding himself with a robotic arm that he's controlling by his brainwaves. So the experimenter is moving around where the marshmallow is, and oh, didn't quite get it. There we go. There's one point on this video where there's a little marshmallow goo left on the robotic hand, and the monkey licks it. I mean, it really gives you the sense that this monkey has, incorporated this robotic arm into his own body schema, his own sense of self. Okay, well, I think that's probably enough of this monkey. There is also research, there are also, clinical trials with humans using the same kind of system. So in this case, you're going to see work done by a company called BrainGate that has implanted a chip with many electrodes into, again, motor cortex, and allowed paralyzed patients to learn to control their brain activity and motor cortex, essentially by thinking about making the movements to operate external devices. And let me show you a video of that.
Kathy Hutchinson is among the first humans to have her brain directly wired to a computer. Years ago, Kathy suffered a stroke that left her mentally sharp but trapped inside a paralyzed body and unable to speak, locked in like Scott Mackler. 3 years ago, Kathy volunteered to have the same kind of sensors we saw in the monkeys implanted in her motor cortex, which controls movement and is located right on the surface of the brain. The sensors connect to the computer through this plug on her head. The system is called BrainGate, and it was created by a team led by Brown University neuroscientist John Donahue.
If you look at this square, each one of these little black boxes is the electrical signal coming from one electrode in the brain.
And each one of those is a neuron firing.
Right, it's its electrical potential. It lets out a 1,000th of a second pulse.
How well do we understand this language?
We have a somewhat of an understanding. We know that there's a general pattern of, for example, left, right, up, down, even fast or slow.
Scott, Kathy now has neural control over that cursor.
Dr. Lee Hochberg of Massachusetts General Hospital is leading the clinical trial. We watched together as Kathy showed us what she can do.
There's a handful of icons that have been placed on the screen.
Here's Google, the New York Times, the Boston Globe, and here's Mass General Hospital Stroke Service.
Yep.
We're seeing Kathy moving this cursor with nothing but her mind.
That's right. She's thinking about the movement of her hand, and she's moving the cursor much as if she had her hand on a mouse.
So if a patient who's paralyzed thinks, move my left arm, the brain fires those neurons.
Yes.
Even though the arm does not move.
Yes, it's very surprising. It fires even though you're not moving.
The cursor's still a little bit wavier.
Moving the cursor with her mind is not as fluid or direct as using a mouse. While we were there, the cursor meandered a bit, sometimes overshot. But Kathy always hit her target in the end.
You want to play some music? All right. She'll click on it. Imagine squeezing her hand, which is the, or doing something else with the click.
And she just clicked play.
Yep, she did.
That's pretty amazing. And so, I mean, if Kathy can control a cursor, she can control anything a computer is connected to.
That's the goal.
The lights, the temperature in the room, even a wheelchair at some point.
Ready to try it for real?
In fact, Kathy has already driven a wheelchair.
See if we can drive it right over to the door.
They haven't let her ride in it yet for her own safety. But with monkeys adopting robot arms and a completely paralyzed person driving a chair, imagine where this could be headed.
Fantastic. Very good.
Okay, so clearly in the last 10 years there's been tremendous progress in interfacing brain activity to outside machinery. What are some of the current remaining barriers to be overcome scientifically and technically? Well, I should say I do not work in this area, but I attended a meeting last fall put on by the New York Academy of Sciences and the Aspen Brain Institute. There was kind of a summit meeting of all the leading researchers, including the people that have been mentioned so far, in brain-machine interfaces. And one of the interesting things about this meeting is people were talking about, what are the outstanding problems that need to be solved, and what are some promising solutions that people are working on. And I would say that the two biggies, the first is just maintaining the connection between the machinery and the brain. The brain, like every other part of the body, reacts to having a foreign body lodged in it. There are all kinds of immune responses, inflammation, scarring, and so forth that take what starts out as a good, useful contact and makes it, over time, convey much less useful information. So people are trying all kinds of end runs around this, all kinds of ways of solving the problem. The end runs including methods that don't involve electrodes at all, but involve optical methods and chemical interfaces. There are also attempts to design electrodes that will sort of encourage the neuropill to just grow right into the electrode, and rather than sort of encapsulate it. So much varied and interesting and very promising work along those lines. The other big challenge is just figuring out how to translate brain activity into commands to the outside world, and or design signals that can be put into the brain in a way that is useful, that the rest of the brain can make use out of. And there's a lot of work going on here. This is, really the stuff of much basic science research, as well as, research aimed at brain-machine interfaces. In fact, one of the big, impetuses to start doing these motor systems was work of Georgopoulos, just basic science research, looking at population coding in motor cortex, looking at the way information available from neurons sampled across electrode arrays corresponded with the monkey's intention to move his eyes somewhere in space or reach somewhere in space. And so that that work goes on. It's of interest in its own right scientifically, and it's one of the things that has to be better understood to create interfaces that enable people to do sort of more complex and highly differentiated things, rather than just get a cursor to slowly drift to one side or the other. So sort of bandwidth, being able to get that information out quickly, and precision. So having given you a little summary of state of the art in brain-machine interfaces, brain-computer interfaces. Now I want to go to the neuroethics of the area. There are a tremendous variety of ethical, legal, and social issues, what we call the ELSI, E-L-S-I, and very, very different in kind. Running the gamut from transhumanist cyborgs to intellectual property problems. How do you encourage innovation, encourage collaboration, and so forth in terms of the financial stakes. So what I want to do is try to subdivide these different issues to just kind of lay them out a little more systematically and make them less like just this mountain of very heterogeneous issues. I'm going to subdivide them in terms of time frame, and the sort of boundary points between immediate, medium term, and long term are, just my probably not terribly educated guesses. But I think it's worth distinguishing between the immediate, the medium, and the long-term challenges. And this is my, best guess at how that maps onto a calendar. But you will see that the salt shakers are a reminder that this, is pure conjecture. So take the actual numbers there with a grain of salt. But whether the numbers are optimistic, it's going to actually take longer, pessimistic, it'll be here sooner. However the numbers are off, I do think that these issues do apply for each of these three categories. So let's start with the long-term issues. These are the sort of big, scary, sexy, depending on your, perspective, issues of how humanity itself may be changed by merging with machines. Some people find this idea very scary and think it should be stopped. Francis Fukuyama, author of Our Post-Human Future, wrote a journal article a few years after Post-Human Future was published called, Transhumanism, the World's Most Dangerous Idea. The idea of transhumanism that Fukuyama finds so dangerous is that as we begin adding to our capabilities and changing the way our bodies and minds work using technology, we will eventually change ourselves so much that we won't be human beings anymore, that we just will not be recognizable as members of the species that we all are now. And this is the idea of transhumanism, that we transcend the limitations of being a human being. We could be, smarter and have amazing memories and be able to perceive, infrared and, on and on. It's kind of science fiction-like. But I want to say that there's really no reason that I have heard that suggests that we couldn't do it, or even that suggests that we wouldn't do it. So, it's a long way off. In my little timeline, I'm saying, 30 or more years away. But it's definitely already on people's minds, and some people think it's a terrible thing. Now, some people think it's a dandy thing. They think being a human being is all about self-improvement, making over the world and even making over yourself to better suit your aims and goals and desires. And what used to be called the World Transhumanist Association, and is now goes by the name Humanity Plus, is a whole international network of people who are interested in the idea of transhumanism and who look forward to it. So what are some of the ethical issues that we will encounter in the long term when we begin to, link up with computers? Well, one person who has discussed this is a computer science professor in England at the University of Reading named Kevin Warwick. He wrote an article on sort of ethical issues in brain-computer interfaces in 2003 in the journal Ethics and Information Technology. And here's some of his thoughts. This is what we might be able to do, and he's saying like this is a good thing, if people could link their brains directly to computers. Oh, and before we go through this list of things that we could do once we're hooked up like that, I should tell you that he is such an enthusiast for brain-machine interfaces and for sort of transhumanism that he has already been implanted with various gadgets, including an electrode array in his arm that you see here, which picks up impulses from his from the nerves in his arm and enable him to open doors and turn lights on and off and so forth using just peripheral nervous activity. So so this man has put his money where his mouth is. He has already gone cyborg and eagerly awaits the time when the chip will be in the brain, not the arm, and we can do things such as use the computer for rapid maths. I guess he's English, so he puts an S on the end of that word. But the idea is that you don't need to get out the calculator and use your finger to punch numbers in. You can just sort of think, the whatever long, complicated expression you want to get the value of, and the computer will read that thought and then send you the answer. You can call on the entire base of knowledge in the World Wide Web, rapidly and effortlessly by thinking. You could have memories of experiences that you didn't experience yourself. So you could upload somebody else's memory into your own brain. You could sense the world in a plethora of ways. Ultrasound, infrared, whatever physical signals there are out there, polarized light, whatever. You could have peripheral devices that pick those up and feed them to your brain. You could understand multidimensionality, perhaps, in a way that we can't do without, with our limited working memory capacities and spatial ability. And you could communicate by thought signals alone, brain to brain. And I do believe his wife also has a chip, and the idea is that someday they'll be able to, send, what do they call it, sweet little nothings to each other. Not whisper sweet little nothings, but twitch them by the arm. Okay. So, what are the ethical implications of this? Well, he says that basically cyborgs may become so capable, so intellectually capable, that they would find anything that an unimplanted, unenhanced human has to say sort of trivial. They would care about their own kind, much as we care about our kind, and humans may not figure too highly in their view. And then, in terms of our treatment of them, could we expect them, or could we expect ourselves, if we upgrade, to sort of, you know, merge in effect and just become nodes in some supercomputing network. I have to say that, you know, the by and large, the uses that Warwick envisions in this article don't seem all that compelling. I mean, I, for one, would not want, you know, brain surgery just to not have to put my fingers on a calculator. And, you know, likewise, searching the internet with Google is fine. I don't mind having to do it outside my head. But I do think that as we approach the point of, you know, 30 years from now or whatever, we'll have more experience with the things that we can do and the things that work well and the things that people like having tried them. And I think we will discover other kinds of attractive options that, you know, brain-computer interfaces might offer us. And I do think that, you know, as with any kind of permanent modification of a person, whether it's by genetic engineering or by gadgetry, if the if the result is individuals who are just, you know, far smarter, far more capable, far more, you know, who knows, maybe far more ethical and caring. I mean, you know, there's lots of different ways a brain could be upgraded. I think I do somewhat resonate with, you know, with this concern, like what would happen to the people who don't enhance? You know, he suggests that these cyborgs of the future may regard human beings kind of the way human beings regard chimps right now. And, you know, some people are nice to chimps, but some chimps, you know, suffer at the hands of humans. And, you know, it's very hard to know how that would go if some of our species decide to upgrade and others don't. So this is, I think, you know, really long-range reasoning about what the ethical issues are. You know, it's very hard to not sound a little silly and a little fanciful and a little like you're borrowing trouble, like, you know, you're afraid of being oppressed by, you know, people with computers in their heads. You know, aren't there better things to worry about in this day and age? And I think that's all very true. And I think we just have to recognize that we are talking very long range here, and maybe we can more fruitfully revisit these issues when some of the nearer term issues have been lived through, you know, experienced and learned from. So what about the medium term? This is, again, on my, you know, rough guesstimate timeline between about 10 years from now and 30 years from now. This, what I mean by medium term is when the technologies are routinely used. Okay, so there are some that are used now in clinical practice, cochlear implants. There are others that are getting there. But what about when, you know, sizable numbers of our brethren have brain implants that are either bringing information in or taking information out? What will be the ethical challenges at that point? And the answer that I have is okay. One issue is going to be, you know, more of a traditional bioethical issue. Who's going to have access to brain-computer interfaces, to therapeutic brain-computer interfaces? Okay, we're not talking about, you know, making super brains. We're talking about helping paralyzed people to move through the world. We're talking about helping blind people to see. These are expensive technologies. And, you know, of course, price comes down as volume goes up and all that, but, you know, they they're expensive to implant, and they require maintenance. It isn't just sort of pop it in and you're good to go. So, you know, compared to the cost of other kinds of healthcare, you know, is this going to be viewed as something that, you know, your health plan should cover? You know, is the expense justifiable for the help that it gives the individuals who are helped? You know, how will we manage that as a society, getting them to the people who need them? Okay. Another ethical issue that I think will arise once, you know, some of these systems are actually out there in clinical use is control of the inputs and the outputs. How much control should patients have? You know, now you can turn off your hearing aid if you're, you know, sick of hearing your old spouse yammer on, you know, or you know, you can, I don't know, you could, you know, but the question is, should patients be able to, you know, vary, you know, the range of, you know, sensory signals that they're getting, the kinds of, the ways they want the output of their motor system to be used. To what extent will the medical establishment sort of say, yeah, this is something we're giving you, it's to enable you, and, you know, you're in the driver's seat, you make these decisions. What about involuntary treatment? You know, certainly for some psychiatric conditions that might benefit from, you know, some sort of a stimulation protocol that might be initiated by a computer when certain patterns of brain activity are detected. You could imagine, you know, involuntary treatment being imposed with BCIs the same way it's imposed with drugs for the safety of the person or society. But unlike drugs that, you know, basically wash out of your system as soon as you stop taking them, you know, this is major brain surgery that leaves, you know, a device in your head. So, you know, in the medium term, again, a fairly straightforward bioethical issue, but one that will, I think, arise once we have BCIs in common use. Finally, concerning control of inputs and outputs, what to do about hackers. So, you know, people already, you know, for motivations that are, you know, unclear to me, you know, write computer viruses and send them around the world, infecting people's computers, their cell phones. We have people who, you know, for, you know, to steal money or to just out of curiosity, you know, hack into secure systems of banks or the Pentagon or whatever. What if one of these hackers wants to hack into your brain, right? I mean, there are issues, not insurmountable issues. Like all of these issues, it's just, you know, there are precedents. We have dealt with analogous kinds of problems before, but those problems, I think, will have to be addressed here because you really don't want, you know, hackers hacking into your brain. Another application, another medium-term ethical issue, once we have these being developed, is which applications will be developed. So, you know, we've already seen with the iPhone, you know, on the outside of the head interface, you know, people are designing gaming systems because you can sell them and you don't have to worry about lawsuits with, you know, somebody being harmed. You know, games might be an economically attractive area. Certainly, treatments for very common conditions are attractive for the device manufacturers because those are conditions that, they can sell a lot of the product to. But what about, orphan conditions? What about diseases that affect very few people? What about diseases that affect, mainly poor people, third world people, where they aren't going to be able to sell much? Are we going to ignore those needs? Again, nothing stunningly novel, but I think these are the things that will arise with BCI once it becomes established as a treatment modality. And finally, what I'm referring to as the yuck factor. If BCI can be used safely, without a lot of complications, then it will be considered for increasingly non-serious, non-dire conditions. Will people embrace that, or will they just find it unthinkable to have something, put in their brain for something that isn't, I'm locked in, I need some way to communicate with the outside world. Okay. And then finally, frank enhancement. Will people, contrary to the last point, will people actually seek out enhancements based on brain-machine interfaces? Maybe you're a patient who already has to be implanted with an interface device, let's say, for vision, but you say, well, gee, as long as you're, rigging up this artificial retina for me, can you let me see, infrared too? Could be useful for various reasons. I mean, I'm not sure why somebody would want to see infrared, but the point is, once you have to be implanted for a therapeutic reason anyway, there may be ways that your implant can extend your capabilities beyond what what it's intended to restore. So maybe like motor function. Could you if we get to the point where there are, sort of robotic exoskeletons that can, not just let people move cursors on screens with brain-machine interfaces, but actually get up and move around, should the exoskeleton be, designed in a way that the person can, leap 10-foot high barriers and be like a superhero? That would be an enhancement that seems like once you're doing the therapy, the enhancement is really just a short hop from there, but I think it has ethical implications. So enhancement is an LC topic unto itself, and we're not going to go into that tonight. Short-term issues. There's not a lot to say here, except that in the short term, in the next 10 years, I think the way this field is going to develop will depend a lot on various intertwined issues that come down to money. So the issue of funding, who's paying for these systems to be developed? What's the balance of private and public funding? Conflict of interest, who should be, who should be involved in doing the research? What should their relationship be with the private companies? How about regulation? Should the regulators be people who are in the business, and so forth? Intellectual property law is another biggie that has been a contentious issue in the pharmaceutical industry with development of new drugs. Depending on how the laws are written or changed, it can have the effect of encouraging innovation or sort of taking the incentive away, or taking the incentive away to collaborate with people who might otherwise be considered rivals. Regulation, both of the practice of using brain-computer interfaces once they're up and available, but also of clinical trials. The people at the conference that I went to last fall were complaining, they were all complaining about the difficulty of getting investigative device permits to do clinical trials in this country. I felt kind of sorry for the speaker from the FDA. she was hammered. So apparently clinical trial regulation is at least perceived by the people doing the research as a real barrier right now. So going back to the sort of scheme of like 3 phases, and not emphasizing the number of years that I hung on them really, but just sort of the idea that we have these here and now problems, and how we resolve these issues of funding and regulation is going to very much determine what applications get developed, and what kinds of conditions are these therapies being aimed at, and who owns them, and what will the financial incentives be to expand beyond the initial set of conditions addressed. Once we get to this phase and begin to deal with these ethical challenges, we will be, in effect, living among people who have brain chips, have computers interfaced to their brains, and we will know so much more than we do now about how people think about these things, how it plays out economically in terms of people's individual lives. And I think from that platform, we will have a much better sense of, long-term, are people going to be connecting to the internet? Are they going to be, as Warwick said, sort of merging into one big mind-melded, web of humanity? Will they want to stay individual, and so forth? Right now, it's nothing but pure speculation that we can apply to thinking about these things. But once we've spent some time living, in this kind of a world, I think we'll have a much better sense of where the concerns are, and where the wonderful opportunities are. So that will, from a sort of platform of living with various kinds of brain-machine interfaces for perception and motor control, we'll have a much better sense of how that might be parlayed into the longer-term future. And speaking of sort of step-by-step going into the longer-term future, I just want to leave you with this last slide, cartoon, Gay and Wilson, and I'll read it aloud in case it's not visible here on the screen. The caveman is saying to the modern Homo sapiens, I was wondering when you'd notice there's lots more steps. So, thanks.